happening now in real time. The president is using his executive time this morning, his fifth day with no public schedule. But what he's doing is he's writing on Twitter, trying to basically make his case. This after his top intelligence chiefs contradicted him on the situation in several of the hotspots all around the world. Listen to what they told Congress.
Against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly.
ISIS is intent on resurging and still commands thousands of fighters in Iraq and Syria.
Chairman Kim, we have a great chemistry, and we're well on our way. You know, we signed an agreement. It said we will begin the immediate denuclearization.
North Korea will seek to retain its WMD capabilities and is unlikely to completely give up its nuclear weapons and production capabilities.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
Not only have the Russians continued to do it in 2018, but we've seen indication that they're continuing to adapt their model.
All right, joining us now, we have Phil Mudd, former CIA counterterrorism analyst, Samantha Vinograd, former senior aide to the National Security Advisor in the Obama White House, and Joe Lockhart, former Clinton White House press secretary. Great to have all of you. Sam, you're the expert. I want to start with you in terms of, as we know, President Trump decides foreign policy by feeling. He feels he has a good chemistry with Kim Jong-un, therefore Kim Jong-un must be telling the truth. He admires Vladimir Putin, therefore Vladimir Putin must be telling the truth. Peel back the curtain for us. Tell us what goes on in the White House before the national security advisors like that, and the intel chiefs, I should say, come out and deliver an assessment like they did.
Well, I've actually been there when this briefing was presented to the president. There were no surprises from the president's perspective in what the intelligence community chiefs made very public yesterday. Typically, this worldwide threat assessment, which is the coordinated analysis of the 16 members of the intelligence community. This isn't just the director of national intelligence, the CIA director. It is coordinated assessments about what they all believe to be true. This assessment is typically delivered to the president. It's often briefed to him verbally so that he can really plan what his priorities should be for the coming year. And importantly, get a sense of where his policies may or may not be working. That way he can choose where to devote resources and where to change course. North Korea is a perfect example. A responsible president, after getting a briefing like this, would say, my policy on North Korea needs to change. They're not going to denuclearize. What should my goals be realistically on North Korea? Instead of changing his policies on North Korea, the president doubled down by tweet this morning, which really begs a question of where is he getting his intelligence from? If it's not from his own experts, is it from his 2 cents? Is it from television? Or is it from the foreign leaders that he tends to meet with by himself without any note-takers present?
Look, I was going to wait to play this sound, but since you asked the question, where does he get his intelligence?
We have the answer.
We have the answer. It's Lou Dobbs who goes on TV last night and attacks the director of national intelligence, the DNI, Dan Coats, for presenting the intelligence that he has discovered and uncovered around the world. Listen to this.
What the hell is wrong with the DNI? He has no political judgment. He has no sense of proportion. I mean, what in hell is he thinking about?
Phil Mudd, your take on Mr. Dobbs there?
Mr. Dobbs, what the hell are you talking about? Let's be clear here. 17 years ago, I was there. The agency, the CIA, said, look, the President of the United States wants us to help the American people understand how bad Saddam Hussein is. I remember the path we took. I understand the reasons we took it. Let's help support the president. 17 years later, I think people of my generation, and for example, Gina Haspel, the CIA director, is from my generation, are looking, saying, look, the president has the right to say we want a new path on places like Russia, Iran, North Korea. But we got to get out and tell the American people, here's what the facts are. If the president or Lou Dobbs wants to say the tooth fairy exists, the intel guys aren't going to say, look, let me explain where the tooth fairy lives. They got to offer the facts, and they did. What's the problem here? You want to relive Iraq again? We're not going to do it.
I mean, so Joe, as Sam just said, the president's been briefed by the intel chiefs, okay?
Right.
So he knows all the, whatever it is, the intel that they've seen, the facts on the ground, the surveillance photos, whatever it is they have. And he is sticking with his gut feeling that Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin must be good guys somehow, and they're telling him the truth. I mean, it's really either woefully naive or, I guess, arrogant that you're just going to stick with your gut feeling.
Yeah, well, it's problematic in one sense, to ignore your intelligence chiefs. It's really problematic to make Lou Dobbs the head of your CIA and intelligence operations. The guy has been screaming at the TV for 30 years. Didn't make sense 30 years ago. Doesn't make sense now. It also is problematic but for Trump, I think it's more than about feel. It's about politics. He's trying to create a brand. Remember, it shouldn't be surprising. He stood at the convention and said, only I can solve these problems. Only I. So all of the apparatus of government is useless to him. He's got the idea. The problem is reality is meeting this image that Trump has tried to create. And it's just a very dangerous situation. And yesterday was remarkable. We have gotten numb to the daily drip of what happens in Washington. To have all of these 16 intelligence agencies to get up there and say, the president is lying to you. They didn't use those words, but they were saying the president lies to you every day. That is remarkable.
They didn't say that. I mean, they really didn't say that. But what Dan Coats did say is that he's not going to have his facts and the intelligence swayed by politics. He did go out of his way to say that, and you can interpret that as you will. Sam, there was another development last night. The Financial Times has a report on what now appears to be a pattern. This has to do with Buenos Aires. The president was in Buenos Aires. Vladimir Putin was there. There was a formal bilateral meeting that was canceled because of Russian activities against Ukraine. But the Financial Times reports that Donald Trump sat down with Vladimir Putin for several minutes of conversation at the end of the evening at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires with no translator or note taker from the U.S. side to record the dialogue between the leaders. That's according to people who had direct knowledge. There was a Russian translator there, and apparently the FT is learning from Russian sources that some of the things were discussed were Syria, policy in Ukraine, a number of foreign policy issues.
Well, I just answered my previous question, which is where does the president get intelligence and foreign policy advice from? Ostensibly from Vladimir Putin, who he's treating as his shadow national security advisor in this case. He's spending more time alone with him, talking about sensitive issues and getting insights from him and giving information to the Russian government that his team may not have than he may be spending with John Bolton or the intelligence chiefs. And what this tells us is that the president really does not engage in the most basic counterintelligence hygiene. This G20 meeting came well after the Helsinki summit when there was so much criticism about the president handing Vladimir Putin just manipulation points in terms of what the Russians knew and what the United States didn't know. He chose to make that same mistake again. We know that the president was the subject of a counterintelligence investigation a long time ago by the special counsel. We don't know if that investigation has concluded. But every time that he puts himself in these situations, it makes it so easy for Vladimir Putin to get more manipulation points on him that really adds fuel to the fodder and the conversation about whether there's just something he's trying to hide.
Phil, I want to ask you about that because this, oops, he's done it again. I mean, we don't know if this is a mistake or if this is by choice, because now it's Helsinki where this has happened, where the president met with Putin without a U.S. representative to record it. Hamburg, as we know, he took the interpreter's notes when the interpreter was there so that even his own advisors back at the White House don't know what was said. The files, even the classified files now, do not represent the details of what has been said in now these 3 different places, including Buenos Aires 2 months ago. So what are the manipulations? I mean, if only Putin and his interpreter know, what position does that put President Trump in?
Well, I think there's a couple of questions you'd have to ask of him. The first is, if he made a decision with Putin, who executes that decision? The president makes a decision. The Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, they execute. If they had a conversation, that is Putin and the president, about Syria, and they decided something, what happens? The second is, as Sam was pointing out, let's say Putin lays out what he's doing in Syria, and the facts that the intel guys have don't correspond with what Putin said. Who's going to tell the president, Mr. President, Putin just sold you a bill of goods. It's fake. What they're doing in Syria is different than what he said. Who gives the president the truth? There is one final question, Allison, that really disturbs me about this. I suspect that the president offered perspectives on what he was going to do in Syria to Putin, who's an adversary, before the president told allies like the Turks. That is, he told an enemy what we're doing in Syria before he told a friend. Not good business right there.
And remember, just a few weeks later, we changed our policy.
Yeah.
He said, we're getting out of Syria. And by all accounts, the defense secretary didn't know that we changed our policy. The intelligence community didn't know we'd changed our policy. But if they were talking about Syria, it appears that maybe Vladimir Putin not only knew about our new policy, but had a big influence
or suggested
on that change.
it.
Yes, or suggested it.
But bottom line is we don't know.
We don't know.
Simply don't know because there was no other U.S. president.
And we should know. Yeah. So, I mean, I can make these statements that, Vladimir Putin's did, but we should know. The public should have the confidence that the entire apparatus of our government is working in the same direction, not at odds with the president.